My name is Clara Anderson, and I grew up believing that hard work, loyalty, and being a good daughter would always lead to love and respect. I was wrong. My father, Henry Anderson, was one of the most respected property developers in the state. Everyone admired him, not just for his business empire, but also for the way he seemed to value family. To the outside world, we were the perfect family, but inside it was different. The cracks were invisible to others, but they were always there. I was the youngest of three. My older sister, Hannah, was the golden child, always praised, always placed on a pedestal. My brother, Thomas, was the pride of the family, Dad's legacy, and me, I was the afterthought. The quiet one, the one who helped clean the table after dinner, who sat in the back seat during family events, who stayed silent to keep the peace. Even as adults, that dynamic never changed. Hannah married a lawyer and had a Pinterest-worthy life. Thomas took over some of Dad's business operations and was hailed as the heir apparent. And me, I worked in a small law office, paid my own rent, and never once asked my father for a handout. But I loved him, genuinely. Despite how he favored the others, I always defended him. When Hannah rolled her eyes at his old-fashioned views, I'd tell her he meant well. When Thomas got impatient with his slow decision-making, I reminded him how much Dad had sacrificed for us. So when Dad fell ill, I was the one who sat by his bedside the most. I rearranged my schedule, took days off work, and made sure his favorite blanket was always near. I read to him. I made him soup. I held his hand when the pain was unbearable. He noticed. I know he did. Clara, he once whispered, squeezing my fingers, you've got more heart than all of them combined. I smiled, brushing a tear from his cheek. Then show them that, Dad. Put it in writing. He chuckled weakly. Don't worry, everything's handled. I believed him. After his funeral, the air in our family changed. It became thick with unspoken questions. No one said it, but everyone was thinking it. What did he leave behind? And who gets what? Hannah and Thomas pretended to mourn with grace, but I saw the glances between them, the smug kind, like they already knew the answers. I told myself I didn't care, that Dad's love was what mattered, that I didn't need property or money to feel valued. But then came the will. It was held in a polished mahogany conference room at our father's longtime law firm. The lawyer, Mr. Winslow, looked like he had aged alongside our family, always serious, always prepared. We sat in a row, Hannah in her pearl earrings, Thomas with his watch that cost more than my car, and me, quiet, observant, and suddenly very aware of the cold. Mr. Winslow cleared his throat and began, to my son Thomas Anderson, I leave the Anderson Ridge estate, valued at $3.7 million. Thomas nodded like he expected it. To my daughter Hannah, I leave the family vacation home in Lakeview and $250,000 from my personal savings. Hannah smiled softly, as if it were just enough. I waited. To my youngest daughter Clara Anderson, I leave my love, my gratitude, and the knowledge that she will always make the right decisions in life. That was it. No house, no money, no land, just words. I blinked. My mouth went dry. Mr. Winslow glanced at me with something close to sympathy, but didn't pause. That concludes the reading of Henry Anderson's will. Silence. No one looked at me, not even Thomas or Hannah. They were already standing, already making calls, already moving on. I felt invisible. Again. But this time, it burned. Later that evening, back in my small apartment, I sat staring at the wall, clutching a cup of cold tea. My mind was racing. Not with jealousy, no. With confusion. He promised me, he told me everything was handled. Was that just something he said to comfort me? I refused to believe that. And then a memory came back. A moment I had almost forgotten. A few months before Dad passed, he handed me an envelope. Keep this safe, he said. Don't open it unless something feels off. At the time I thought it was about a medical directive, maybe something for the hospital. I tucked it away, just like he asked. Now, my hands were shaking as I pulled it from the drawer. Inside was a single piece of paper, typed, signed, notarized. It read, "This is to certify that Clara Anderson is the sole deed holder of properties located at." I froze. I read it again. Not just one property. 3, all unlisted in the formal will. All legally transferred into my name 6 months before he passed. The paper in my hand felt heavier than its weight. 3 properties. Fully deeded. The addresses leapt from the page like secrets finally shouting to be heard. These were not just sentimental plots of land. They were some of Dad's most valuable holdings, properties I remembered visiting as a child. One was a commercial lot near the riverfront, another a historic townhouse downtown, and the third, the most surprising, a sprawling parcel of untouched land in Green Hollow, where development had been booming. I sat there stunned, barely breathing. The legal transfer date was clear: 6 months before his death, before the hospital visits, before the diagnosis. He had done this with full intention. This was no last-minute scribble. This was deliberate. This was his real and yet, he hadn't included it in the formal one read out at the firm. Why? Maybe he knew how my siblings would react. Maybe he didn't want the fight. Maybe he wanted me to discover it after quietly, without their involvement. But I knew one thing now. This was and I was not the forgotten daughter they thought I was. I called Mr. Winslow the next morning. He picked up after the first ring. "Clara," he said, with a voice that sounded less surprised than I expected. "I was wondering when you'd call." My grip on the phone tight. "You knew?" He sighed. "I knew he left certain things outside of the will. Your father was strategic. He didn't always want everything on paper in one place." I pulled the document from the envelope again. "These deeds, are they valid?" "Perfectly legal," he replied. "They were signed, notarized, and filed through a private channel, completely binding." "Why didn't you mention them yesterday?" "Because I was only instructed to read the formal will," he said. "This wasn't part of that directive." I closed my eyes. "Do Thomas and Hannah know?" "Not unless your father told them." Which, given your face during the reading, I doubt he did. He was right. Thomas hadn't said a word to me. Neither had Hannah. They believed they walked away with everything. The next weekend, Hannah invited me to a celebration dinner. It was being hosted at her home, complete with catered food and champagne. "I know things were a little underwhelming for you at the will reading," she said over the phone, using that same pity-laced voice she always reserved for me. "But we're still family. I want us to be close." I said I'd come. Not because I was desperate to reconnect, but because I wanted to see them. I wanted to watch how they moved now that they thought I had nothing. How they smiled, smug and certain, believing the world had once again turned in their favor. I wore a simple black dress. No jewelry, no flash, no need. When I arrived, the room was already buzzing with people. Thomas was there, grinning with a drink in hand, telling a guest about the legacy property he'd inherited. Hannah greeted me like a distant cousin. "There you are," she said, air-kissing both cheeks. "Come in. Relax. Let's toast to Dad's memory." Her husband raised a glass. "To Henry. A man who always took care of his family." I almost choked on my sip. Took care of them. He protected me. Just, not in the way they'd ever understand. The entire night, they didn't ask how I was doing. They didn't mention the fact that I received nothing in the reading. Not even a hint of apology or concern. At one point, Thomas came over and slapped my back like we were old pals. "You okay, Sid?" he asked. "You know, if you ever need help. I mean, I got some room in the Lakeview house. You could house sit if I'm away." I blinked. Was he offering me a spare bedroom out of pity? My own brother? I smiled. "Thanks, but I think I'm doing just fine." He nodded, clearly not listening. "Yeah, you've always been good at making the most out of, well, less." He wandered off before I could say anything more. That night, I went home and pulled out the deeds again. 3 properties. Each one paid for and each one under my name. Legally mine. And suddenly I knew what I had to do. I drove to Green Hollow the next morning. The third property, an untouched field surrounded by trees, was just as I remembered it. Dad used to take us there on Sunday drive. He'd talk about building a second home there someday. Maybe a cabin. Maybe a private retreat. But he never did. Instead, he gave it to me. And now, it was. I stood there in the middle of the quiet field, sunlight filtering through the leaves, wind brushing my hair, and for the first time since the funeral I felt peace. Not revenge. Not anger. Just clarity. But it wouldn't last long, because Hannah and Thomas were about to find out that their version of the story wasn't the whole one. And when they did, let's just say, they were not ready. 3 weeks passed before the truth began to surface. I had gone back to my usual rhythm: work, yoga, reading and occasionally visiting the Green Hollow property on weekends. It had become my private place, a space untouched by my family's arrogance. I wasn't in a rush to make announcements or hold a press conference, but I wasn't hiding either. What they didn't know was that 2 of the 3 properties were already making me money. The commercial lot near the riverfront, I'd leased it to a boutique grocery chain for 5 years. The historic townhouse, rented to a film production crew for an entire season. Combined, they were earning more monthly than Thomas's estate probably cost to maintain. And then, Green Hollow, quiet, undeveloped, and peaceful. That was the crown jewel. Dad knew. He saw where the city was expanding, where zoning laws were shifting. He gave me the one piece of land, with untapped future value, and he gave it to me alone. Then came the text. From Hannah. Hey, I've been meaning to ask. Did Dad ever mention anything about Green Hollow to you? I thought it was supposed to go to all of us, but I just found out it's under your name. Is that a mistake or a mistake? I stared at the screen for a moment, letting her confusion marinate. I replied simply, no mistake. He signed it over months before he passed. I left it at that. Minutes later, my phone rang. I ignored it. Then again. And again. Then, Thomas texted. Clara, we need to talk. There's a serious issue with the Green Hollow property. Call me back ASAP. I didn't, because there was no issue. Only truth they weren't prepared for. The following day, I got an email from a real estate attorney. Subject: Notice of Intended Family Inquiry, Anderson Estate Holdings. In short, Hannah and Thomas were now legally requesting documentation about all 3 properties. They were concerned, the email said, that certain assets had been omitted or unfairly distributed. Unfair. Oh, the irony. For years I was the afterthought. For years they dined on Dad's attention, his praise, his money. They never once paused to ask if I was okay. And now that the narrative had flipped, they wanted clarity. I scheduled a private meeting with the family attorney, Mr. Winslow. His office still smelled like old books and leather polish, just as it did the day the will was read. He welcomed me with a gentle nod. Claire, I was expecting this. I handed him a file with all 3 property deeds. Signed, dated, notarized. These are indisputable, he said. They may hire all the lawyers they want, but unless they can prove coercion or fraud, which based on your father's mental clarity at the time is impossible, you're in the clear. I nodded. But be ready, he added. They're going to fight. Because people like your sibling, they don't lose gracefully. He was right. 2 days later, I received a formal letter from Thomas's lawyer, a classic intimidation tactic, full of inflated language, demands for disclosure, requests to halt all leasing or development activity, until they'd reviewed the situation. I laughed when I read it, because what they didn't understand, what they never understood, was that I didn't owe them answers. I owed myself peace. And I already had it. That weekend I decided to visit the townhouse. It was the property Dad loved most. A charming 3-story brick home in the heart of downtown. He used to say, "This one's special. The bones are good." It had original wood floors, tall windows, and a winding staircase that squeaked just enough to feel nostalgic. I stood in the entryway, staring up at the stained glass skylight. Dad had once told me, "When I'm gone, this house should go to the one who knows how to respect its history." Now it was mine. And suddenly, I knew what to do. I reached out to a journalist I trust, someone who had interviewed me before back when I spoke at a Women in Business panel 2 years ago. I told her I had a story. Not scandal. Just truth. She listened. She took notes. She asked the right question. And a week later, her article went live. Overlooked daughter quietly inherits properties her siblings never saw coming. It didn't mention them by name. It didn't shame. It just told my story. The quiet daughter. The ignored one. The one they thought had nothing, until the deeds came out. The story spread fast. Not because it was juicy, but because it was relatable. So many people saw themselves in it. The daughter who stayed behind, the son who sacrificed. The child who was always told they were fine with less. But now the overlooked were waking up. And my siblings, they were about to realize, they were no longer the only ones holding the family legacy. After the article dropped, things changed quickly, not just for me, but for them. I got dozens of emails from women across the country. Daughters who had been left out of wills, nieces who'd raised their siblings but got nothing in return, friends of the family who were never quite family enough. My inbox overflowed with quiet pain that sounded a lot like mine. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just living a story, I was giving people language for theirs. But Hannah and Thomas, they weren't inspired, they were enraged. It started with phone calls. I ignored the first 5. I didn't have time for emotional gymnastics. Then the texts came. What is this article? You're making us look bad. You're twisting the truth just to get attention. But I hadn't used their names. I hadn't mentioned I hadn't even said siblings. All I did was tell my truth. But nothing infuriates entitled people more than someone they once looked down on. Being seen. Then came the final straw. A message from Hannah. You should come to Thomas's fundraiser next week. Make things right with the family. Everyone's talking about that article. You need to show you didn't mean it that way. Ah yes. The public apology tour. I considered ignoring her, but something in me said go. Not for them. For me. The event was held at a sleek downtown hotel ballroom. Polished marble floors, tall windows, and a string quartet playing near the open bar. I wore a navy blue pantsuit, no frills, just power. When I walked in, I could feel the eyes. People recognized me now. From the article, from LinkedIn, from whispers. Thomas was near the stage, schmoozing with donors. Hannah stood by the entrance greeting guests with a champagne flute in hand. When she saw me, her face froze. Clara, she said, pulling me aside quickly. We didn't expect you to actually come. I thought it would be good for the family, I replied. She forced a smile. Yes, of course. Just be careful tonight. There are a lot of press people here. I'd hate for anything to be taken out of context. I nodded. I'm always careful. I said, that's why Dad trusted me with the titles. Her eyes flashed. Just for a second. But it was enough. The fundraiser was exactly what I expected. Thomas gave a speech about preserving legacy and honoring our father's vision. I almost choked on my sparkling water. Then he invited Hannah up to speak about family values. She smiled wide, her voice smooth. And my brother and I are so proud to carry forward Dad's work. His properties, his projects, they're in safe hands. Safe hands. I clenched my jaw. I hadn't planned to say anything that night. But sometimes the moment calls you. So when the host asked if anyone else from the Anderson family wanted to share a few words, I raised my hand and walked to the mic. Good evening, I began. For those who don't know me, I'm Clara Anderson, Henry Anderson's youngest daughter. The room hushed. You could feel it. I continued. I wasn't originally planning to speak tonight, but I felt like something important was missing. I looked at Thomas, then at Hannah. My father believed in hard work, in strategy, in legacy. He also believed in fairness, though not always in the traditional sense. A few eyebrows lifted. He gave to each of us in different ways, not just in money or property, but in trust, in silence, in secrets meant to be revealed at the right time. Hannah shifted in her heels. And while some of you may know the version of the story presented in public, there's more. I didn't drop details. I didn't expose. I just said, sometimes the most valuable things aren't left in wills, they're left in trust, and they find their way, quietly into the right hands. And then I stepped down. The room was silent, then applause, a little hesitant, but it grew. After the event, a few guests pulled me aside. That was powerful. Your father would be proud. You're so composed. And the best one, from an older woman near the exit. She took my hand and whispered, you reminded me tonight that being quiet doesn't mean being weak. I smiled. Thank you, I said. That's exactly what I hoped for. The next morning, Hannah called me again. Her voice was sharp. How dare you get up there and hijack the event? I was invited to speak, I said calmly. You knew what you were doing. You embarrassed us. No, I replied. You embarrassed yourselves the day you assumed I had nothing to say. Click. The fundraiser fallout lingered for weeks. I thought, maybe after all the tension and exposure, they'd back off. Let things go. Let the silence settle where it belonged. But they did, because people like Hannah and Thomas Don't walk away from a narrative they've controlled for decades. They double down. The next blow didn't come from a phone call or a text, or even an email. It came in the form of a letter, a formal, certified letter from a lawyer who claimed to represent concerned family members of the Anderson estate. The envelope was heavy. I opened it at my kitchen counter with shaking hands, half anxious, half just tired. Inside were 5 pages of legal jargon. Their demand that I freeze all asset activity related to the Green Hollow property and provide a full inventory of any financial income I had earned from the other two. They claimed Dad's mental state was in question, that I had undue influence, that my deeds were suspiciously I read it all without blinking. This wasn't about the land anymore. This was about control, about them realizing the empire wasn't just in their hands, about a lifetime of entitlement being threatened by someone they thought was harmless. Me. I called Mr. Winslow immediately. He reviewed the letter. He didn't even blink. "This is desperate," he said, "and weak. I'll draft a response. But in the meantime, don't stop. Don't pause development. Don't engage directly. What if they escalate it?" I asked. He looked me dead in the eye. "Then let them. They're standing on sand." But legal intimidation wasn't the only tactic they used. Hannah took it upon herself to start spreading rumors. At local charity events, at yoga class, even at my old high school alumni network. "She's being greedy. She manipulated Dad in his final month. She's turning her back on the family." I heard it all. Some of it came back to me through mutual friends. Some through strangers who whispered at networking mixers. And at first, it hurt. Deeply. Not because I believed it, but because I used to believe in. One afternoon, I was walking through the townhouse, making notes for minor repairs, when I found an old box in the hall closet. It was one Dad had labeled himself, "Clara, for when you're ready." I froze. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, photographed from every moment they thought I wasn't seen. Me at science fairs. Me at graduation. Me sitting beside him at the hospital, reading to him while he smiled. And beneath them, a journal. His journal. I opened it to a random page and read, "They think she's soft. But Clara, she sees everything. She listens. And when the time comes, she'll be the only one who does what's right." I closed my eyes and let the tears fall. It wasn't just validation. It was proof. Proof that the man they were claiming I manipulated trusted me more than all of them combined. That night, I released a statement online. Not aggressive. Not dramatic. Just clear. Yes, my father left me properties. No, I did not ask for them. He chose. I will not be bullied for respecting what was entrusted to me. I will not stop developing Green Hollow. And I will not stay silent so others can feel comfortable in their entitlement. It went viral. Again. But this time, the backlash was different. Because people were starting to see the pattern. They saw Hannah and Thomas's loudness for what it was. They saw my consistency, my grace, my composure, and they chose to listen. Quiet revenge had found its rhythm. The next morning, I got a text from someone I didn't expect. "Thomas, we need to talk. Alone. No lawyers, no Hannah." I stared at the screen, and after a moment I replied, "One coffee. 1 hour. That's it." We met at a quiet cafe on the edge of town. Thomas arrived first. He looked like he hadn't slept. Creased shirt, dark circles, jittery hands gripping a to-go cup he barely sipped from. When I walked in, he stood awkwardly, half-reaching, like he wasn't sure whether to hug me or keep his distance. "Clara," he said. "Thomas." We sat. For a while neither of us spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. "I didn't want it to go this far." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean the lawyer letters? The rumors? Or the part where you tried to get my deeds frozen?" He winced. "All of it." Hannah pushed hard. "You know how she is." I laughed once. Quiet. Bitter. "No, Thomas. I know how you are. Always hiding behind someone louder." His mouth tightened. "I'm not proud of it," he said. "But we were shocked. You getting all that without a word. Shocked." I leaned forward. "Dad tried for years to get either of you to take Green Hollow seriously. You called it a money pit. Hannah said it was a waste of He stayed quiet. "And you both got plenty. You got the estate." She got the cash and vacation home. What did you think I was worth? Exactly. Thomas looked down. I guess. I didn't think. Not really. There it was. The closest thing I was ever going to get to an apology. But I didn't come for closure. I came for clarity. So why am I here, Thomas? Why did you want to meet? He hesitated, then pulled out a folded paper from his jacket. I want in, he said. I stared. What? Green Hollow. You're sitting on a gold mine. I have contacts, developers, investors. We could go in together, build something big. I'm not asking for a handout. Just partnership. I blinked. You tried to legally strip me of my rights, and now you want to build condos with me. He leaned in, desperate now. It's smart business, Clara. This feud. It's making us all look bad. But if we joined forces, it could change everything. Make headlines for the right reasons. I stood up. Let me be very clear, I said. I don't need your money, or your name, or your help. He stood too, nervous. Clara, you didn't call me here to apologize. You called me because you finally realized I'm the one holding the keys now. His lips parted, but I was already walking away. Back in the car I let myself cry, not because I was hurt, but because it was the final confirmation I needed. They never valued me. Not truly. Not until I had something they couldn't take. But now, they needed me, and I wasn't giving them anything. That week, I filed for zoning permits on Green Hollow. I didn't need a mega project. I didn't want skyscrapers or shopping plazas. I wanted something quiet, lasting, symbolic, a wellness retreat, nature-focused, women-run, a space for restoration and leadership. I called it the Clara Grove. Developers tried to upsell it. Think bigger, they said. But I was already thinking big. Because peace is revolution, especially when you were never allowed to have it. When the press caught wind of the plans, they ran with it. The Quiet Air's big vision for Green Hollow. Clara Anderson turns inheritance into empowerment retreat. I didn't need fame, but I welcomed the attention, because for every headline that ran, 10 more women reached out. My brother got everything too. I left home because no one saw me either. Your story gave me the courage to speak. One day I received a handwritten card. No name, no return address, just 6 words. He chose right. And so did you. I recognized the writing instantly. Mr. Winslow. The man who had read the will. The man who had honored Dad's instructions. Quietly, faithfully. Without question. I smiled and placed the card in my desk drawer, right next to Dad's journal. Because some reminders, you keep forever. The call came from a woman named Dana Knox, an award-winning journalist from a major news network. She'd read the article about my inheritance. Then she read the follow-up, then the blog posts, the commentary, the message boards filled with stories like mine. And now she wanted to feature me. Full segment, prime time. Not just a story about real estate, she said. A story about family, power, rewriting legacies, quiet strength. I hesitated. I didn't need more exposure. I wasn't chasing fame. But then I thought of Haley, the girl who had emailed me months earlier, thanking me for giving her the courage to walk away from her toxic startup. I thought of the anonymous messages, the women, the overlooked, the daughters left behind. Maybe it wasn't about me anymore. So I said yes. The interview took place inside the Green Hollow property. At that point, the land had already been surveyed. Development fencing surrounded the perimeter, and the new retreat center's blueprint sat neatly on an easel behind us. Dana and I walked the grounds together, camera crew trailing behind, wind brushing through the grass. Did you ever expect, she asked, that you'd be standing here with all this under your name? I smiled softly. No. I expected to be seated at the edge of the table as always. Maybe thanked once. Maybe handed a bracelet or two. But I never thought I'd be the one holding the deeds. Dana tilted her head. And now, I said, I've learned that sometimes, silence is strategy. That what they called passivity was actually patience. That what they mistook for weakness was me, choosing when to strike. The interview aired the following week. It didn't trend. It exploded. Clips went viral on TikTok and Instagram. A quote from the segment was reshared over 40,000 times. Just because they underestimated you doesn't mean they were right. It just means you were busy building. Viewers flooded my inbox. But this time, it wasn't just daughters. It was sons, nephews, cousins, anyone who had ever been told they were less than because they didn't play the game loud enough. And guess what? Quiet Revenge gained 100,000 new followers in 48 hours. That night, I received a message I wasn't expecting. From Hannah. Just 2 words. You win. No apology, no reflection. Just surrender soaked in bitterness. I didn't reply. Because this was never a competition. It was a reclaiming. A soft rise built not on revenge but on revelation. Weeks passed. Construction began. I visited Green Hollow every morning before work. Walking the edge of the land. Watching workers lay foundations and dig new beginnings. One morning, I brought Dad's journal with me. I sat on a wooden bench beneath the old oak, and opened to the final entry. It read, "Legacy isn't about who shouts the loudest. It's about who keeps going when no one's looking." I smiled, then closed the book, because this was the legacy now, and I was living it. The first building went up in early spring. Steel beams rose like ribs out of the earth, holding the weight of something more than walls. It wasn't just a retreat anymore. It was a message that said, "I belong here." And no amount of exclusion could rewrite that. The Clara Grove was real now, not just blueprints and hope. It was physical, rooted, and every corner of that land whispered one truth louder than anything my family had ever shouted. Dad trusted me with the future. Around that time, I was invited to speak at a private summit for female founders. The invite read, "We believe your journey embodies what it means to quietly disrupt, build legacy and rise on your own terms." It felt surreal. I had spent most of my life shrinking in the presence of my family, dodging their shadows. Now, I was being asked to lead the conversation. The room was packed with CEOs, innovators and quiet warriors, people who had carved space in rooms not meant for them. I shared my story, not to boast, but to show them what happens when you stop asking for crumbs, and claim the feast you were meant to build. Back at Green Hollow, things were accelerating. Our wellness retreat was gaining traction. We had partnerships with mental health professionals, yoga instructors and career coaches. We weren't just creating a place for rest. We were creating a place for rebirth. A woman named Joy joined the team, a trauma therapist, who had once lost custody of her child due to a false report. She looked me in the eyes during orientation and said, "This land feels safe. I haven't felt that in years." And I realized, it wasn't about property anymore. It was about peace. And the more peace I built, the less interested I became in proving anything to my siblings. But that didn't stop Hannah from trying one last time. She showed up unannounced at the property. A sleek black car pulled onto the gravel drive one morning as I was walking the grounds. She stepped out, heels sinking into the dirt, her designer scarf fluttering in the wind. "Clara," she called, arms crossed. "We need to talk." I didn't stop walking. She followed me. "You can't just rewrite the story, you know." I turned. "I didn't rewrite anything. I just told the parts you tried to erase." Her jaw clenched. "Dad was trying to keep the peace. He never wanted us fighting." I nodded. "Then you probably shouldn't have started a war." She threw her hands up. "You always think you're so noble, so pure. But you played the game too. You just did it with a smile." I stepped closer. "No, Hannah. I didn't play a game. I built something. You fought for control. I fought for clarity." She looked away, then quieter. "What do you want from us?" I exhaled. "Nothing." And I meant it. Because real revenge is needing nothing from people who once thought you had nothing to offer. That night, I lit a candle in the Green Hollow chapel we'd just finished constructing. It was quiet. "Still," I whispered, "I didn't inherit the land. I inherited your eyes, Dad. Your mind. Your legacy. And I'm using it to build something none of them will ever understand." Then I blew out the flame and let the darkness settle. Not as an ending, but as a sign that light always returns. Months passed. The Clara Grove opened quietly. No ribbon cutting, no flashy press conference. Just a simple gathering of people who had been watching the project unfold, people who saw something more than structures and soil. They saw healing. And in every room, from the meditation suites to the open-air classrooms, was the echo of a single truth. You are not defined by who chose you last. You are defined by what you chose to build when no one was watching. The guests came from everywhere. A woman who had just walked away from a 15-year marriage that had hollowed her out. A retired teacher who never received a single thank you from her own children. A young man whose mother was left out of his grandfather's will and had spent her entire life believing she didn't matter. They walked through our doors quietly. They left standing taller. I kept a journal by my bed at the Grove. Not Dad's. Mine. And every night I wrote down a lesson. Sometimes it was simple. Let them talk. Build anyway. You are allowed to be soft and powerful. Silence doesn't mean surrender. One night, I wrote, "You no longer need their permission to matter." And as I put the pen down, I felt a peace that I had chased my whole life. Hannah and Thomas. They faded into the background. I heard that Hannah tried launching a podcast about family finance. It never took off. Thomas started attending some of the same networking events I spoke at. But we never exchanged words. They were shadows now, and not because I banished them, but because I stopped turning toward them for light. Then one quiet evening, something unexpected arrived. A small box. No return label. Inside a photo. It was of me and Dad sitting on the porch at Green Hollow. Back when I was a teenager. He was laughing. I was barefoot, sketching floor plans in a notebook. On the back of the photo, in his handwriting, it said, "One day you'll build more than buildings. You'll build something they can't tear down." No signature, no message. Just, and I cried harder than I had in months. Because it was like he knew all along that I would be the one to carry it forward. Not the loudest, not the favorite, but the one who listened, and waited, and built. That week, Quiet Revenge passed 1 million subscribers, and someone messaged me asking, "What does revenge feel like now?" I smiled, and replied, "It doesn't feel like revenge. It feels like freedom." The Grove was full. Every room booked. Every cabin occupied. People came not just to rest, but to remember who they were before they were told they were too much, or not enough, or not worthy at all. One woman told me, "This place feels like the apology I never got." Another whispered, "You don't know it, but you helped me leave the family that buried me alive." And I realized, I wasn't just healing my story, I was holding space for others to rewrite theirs. I no longer thought about Hannah and Thomas every day. They had become the background hum to a song I no longer listened to. Every now and then, someone would mention them, or send a news article, or forward a picture from a gala they attended. Their smiles stretched just wide enough to look real. But I didn't click. I didn't comment. I didn't care, because they had finally become strangers. And not because I pushed them out, but because I rose so far they couldn't reach me anymore. One night, as the wind rustled through the trees outside my window, I opened Dad's journal again. I turned to the very first page. It read, "If Clara's reading this, then it means she found it. It means she didn't shrink. It means she remembered who she is." That night, I lit a candle for him. Not out of mourning, out of gratitude, because even in his silence, he had trusted me with the loudest legacy of all, the power to choose myself. So now, when people ask what I would say to anyone left out, overlooked, discarded by their own blood, I tell them, do not beg to be seated at a table that treats you like a bird. Build your own. Make it bigger. Make it softer. And when they come knocking, let them watch. But don't shrink to make them comfortable. Because this is quiet revenge. Not about anger. Not about destruction. But about rising quietly, fully and completely without their permission. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you, share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own power. And if you've ever been made to feel small, remember, you were never too little. They were just too blind. Subscribe to Quiet Revenge for more stories like mine, because the most powerful revenge is the life you live when they said you couldn't.